Imagine a quiet family's life shattered by a discovery that would lead to unimaginable violence. A mother, unknowingly uncovering a dark secret, finds out that her daughter has been secretly involved with a neighbor in a sexual relationship. This revelation sets off a series of events that no one could have predicted. What could drive a daughter to murder the person who loved and cared for her? This isn't just a story of betrayal, it's a story of desperation, rage, and a crime that stunned an entire community. How did a simple secret cause such an eruption of violence? What was the breaking point that pushed this young woman to kill her own mother? With her loyalty to the man she had become involved with blinding her to the damage she was causing to her relationship with her mother. Some even argue that her actions were driven by a deeper sense of desperation, as she felt she was losing everything in moments of extreme emotional distress. Some people act out in ways that seem impossible to understand, but what we know is that, when confronted, the daughter chose violence. The investigators knew that every detail in this case was crucial, and they began combing through the evidence meticulously, trying to make sense of what had transpired. It appeared that the mother had fought back, desperately trying to escape her attacker. The bloodstains seemed to suggest she had been attempting to reach the door, possibly trying to flee to safety when she was struck down. But did she die there? Or was she killed somewhere else before being moved to the spot where she was found? The details of the struggle hinted at a chaotic and emotional confrontation, as if the attack was not planned, but rather an explosive eruption of anger and fear, as though she believed there was no other way out. It's the belief that we can rely on each other, that we can share anything without fear. Hidden away in the daughter's room, they found a stash of letters, photographs, and personal objects. These weren't just any items, they were intimate keepsakes that suggested a deeper, more complicated relationship between the daughter and the neighbor than had initially been understood. The items revealed a web of secrecy and deception, and as the police dug further, they realized that the daughter and the neighbor had been much more involved than anyone had first imagined. The confrontation, which could have been resolved with a calm conversation, suddenly became something much darker. It wasn't just a heated argument, it was the breaking of a bond that had been there for years. And the mother's lifeless body lay in the kitchen, cold to the touch. There were clear signs of a violent struggle, items knocked over, and blood smeared across the floor. But there was something odd about the situation. Despite the obvious signs of a confrontation, there were no signs of forced entry. The front door was unlocked, and the windows remained intact. The scene begged the question, how did this happen? The daughter, in a moment of uncontrollable anger and panic, ended her mother's life. The violence that followed was the result of a split-second decision, perhaps fueled by the shock of being caught in something so secretive and unacceptable. She immediately confronted her daughter, and their conversation quickly became emotional and tense. It all comes down to emotions spiraling out of control, and the daughter's desperate need to protect a secret that, in her mind, was worth anything. It wasn't just a fight. It was a moment of complete desperation that led to the loss of a mother's life. The tragedy that followed was something no one could have predicted. What started as a conversation about betrayal turned into a nightmare of violence, leaving behind a trail of pain and regret for any parent. This kind of discovery would be painful enough, but it was just the beginning. What happened next escalated far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The situation quickly spiraled out of control, and a tragedy unfolded, leaving everyone involved in shock and horror. What seemed like a difficult conversation turned into something far darker, and it all started with a secret that could no longer be kept. But sometimes, that trust is broken in ways we never saw coming. Who had once been so close to her mother to commit such an unforgivable act? Was it the fear of her secret life being exposed? Or was there something deeper, a growing resentment? Or perhaps the overwhelming fear of losing control over everything she had been hiding? For this family, it all started when the mother unexpectedly discovered her daughter's secret relationship with the neighbor, a man in his 40s. The relationship had been hidden behind the image of a friendly neighbor, making it even harder for the mother to understand. She never expected something like this to be happening right under her nose. Stay with us as we uncover the chilling details behind this tragic crime, revealing the hidden darkness within a seemingly normal family. In any family, trust is what keeps everything together. When the mother learned the truth, she was completely shocked and filled with disbelief. What could possibly push a young woman? Experts believe that there are several psychological factors at play. Here, the daughter may have felt trapped in the heat of the moment. The situation exploded. How did this simple confrontation lead to such a deadly outcome? When authorities arrived at the scene, the reality of what had happened became chillingly clear. The house was eerily quiet. Could this have been a crime of passion? A desperate act driven by anger and fear? Or was there something more sinister at play? As they carefully examined the scene, the investigators found traces of blood leading from the kitchen to the back door. In addition to the disturbing physical evidence, investigators uncovered more concerning clues. The neighbor, initially considered just a bystander, now appeared to have played a much more significant role in the unfolding events. The mother's tragic death was not just the result of a simple argument gone wrong. In this case, the neighbor's involvement raised far more questions than answers. What appeared to be a simple affair between two consenting adults quickly turned into something far darker. This was no ordinary affair. Who at first appeared to be a willing participant in the relationship seemed to be under the influence of the neighbor in ways that weren't entirely clear at the time. As the relationship between the daughter and the neighbor deepened, it became clear that his influence over her was not only emotional, but also psychological. Allowing things to spiral out of control? It was difficult to say. On the one hand, there were no signs that he directly encouraged her to kill her mother. But on the other hand, his manipulative behavior seemed to have placed her in a position where violence appeared to be the only way out. The emotional pressure he put on her was immense, and he had spent months, if not years, eroding her sense of self-worth and her ability to make decisions on her own. The neighbor had been manipulating her sense of reality when questioned by the police. He remained eerily calm, refusing to accept responsibility for his role in the tragic events. Could this crime have been avoided if the neighbor had stayed out of the picture? Or was the daughter, in the end, acting on her own distorted sense of reality, fueled by fear, desperation, and a twisted desire to protect her dangerous secret? He seemed to view the entire situation as something that had simply gotten out of hand, without acknowledging the damage his manipulation had caused. His lack of empathy only deepened the mysteries surrounding his true involvement. Was he truly unaware of the depth of his influence on the daughter, or did he simply not care, making her question her own feelings and emotions? He had created an environment of isolation, emotional manipulation, and dependency. The daughter, already vulnerable, had fallen deeper into his web of control. Whether he had directly orchestrated the murder or simply allowed it to happen remains a subject of debate. But what was undeniable was the significant role he played in the emotional turmoil that led to it. This type of psychological control is often difficult to detect from the outside, but it is one of the key factors that lead to tragic outcomes like the one that unfolded here. The investigators discovered a series of text messages and phone calls between the two, many of which showed the neighbor pressuring her into keeping their relationship a secret from everyone, including her own family. These messages revealed a sense of control, where the neighbor used manipulation to make the daughter feel as though she had nowhere to turn except to him. The evidence suggested a pattern of behavior from the neighbor that was far more calculated and controlling. The daughter often spoke of feeling isolated and misunderstood by her family. She expressed feeling rejected and neglected. And in many ways, the neighbor positioned himself as her only source of emotional support. Over time, he convinced her that her bond with him was special, that it was more than just a physical relationship. He made her believe that their connection was something no one else could understand, isolating her further from her family and any other support system. He had not only manipulated the daughter emotionally, but had also subtly instilled in her a sense of dependence and loyalty to him. What started as a seemingly harmless attraction soon turned into full-fledged emotional and psychological abuse. The relationship between the daughter and the man was not just sexually charged, but also manipulative and controlling in ways that would later shock everyone involved. It wasn't just an affair, it was a toxic, twisted dynamic that set the stage for a tragedy, but rather a culmination of hidden relationships, emotional manipulation, and a tragic spiral of fear and violence. Investigators now face the difficult task of piecing together the true role of the neighbor in this devastating event, and whether he had done more than just stand by as a silent participant in the daughter's actions. Though he wasn't physically present at the crime scene, his connection to the daughter became more troubling as the investigation continued. The police began to uncover evidence that suggested he had been manipulating the daughter, playing a part in creating the environment of secrecy and deceit that eventually led to the fatal confrontation. But was he truly a passive figure in this tragedy, or did he have a more direct role in pushing the daughter towards such a deadly outcome? As the evidence mounted, it became clear that the situation was far more complex than initially thought. Behind every crime, there are usually hidden motivations, things that aren't immediately visible to the naked eye. Experts in psychological manipulation often point out that abusive relationships can take many forms. While some are physically violent from the start, others, like the one between the daughter and the neighbor, can begin subtly, building over time in ways that may seem innocent at first. In this case, the man, despite his age and the obvious power imbalance, was able to exploit the vulnerabilities of the young woman. He preyed on her emotional instability and insecurity, using his position as a trusted neighbor to gain her affection. Over time, what began as a flirtatious relationship became something much more sinister, something that would eventually push the daughter to the point of no return. As the investigation deepened, the disturbing truth began to emerge. What made this case even more chilling was that there were also more concerning signs of emotional manipulation. But there was something even darker at play here. At the heart of it all, investigators began to ask themselves, did the neighbor actively push the daughter toward violence, or did he simply stand by? What further raised suspicion was the neighbor's lack of remorse. As investigators pieced together the timeline of events, it became increasingly clear that the neighbor's role in the daughter's actions was pivotal. The real question was whether the daughter would have resorted to violence without his influence. Investigators continued to look for more evidence, searching for any hint that would explain the exact nature of the neighbor's involvement. The fact that he had been so deeply entangled in the daughter's life, it was the result of a toxic, controlling relationship that destroyed not just one life but two. The true extent of the neighbor's influence over the daughter would only continue to unfold as the case moved forward. But it was already clear that his involvement played a key role in the tragic events that led to the mother's death, that he had been the one to provide the emotional support she desperately needed for years. There had been issues of neglect, not necessarily in the traditional sense of abandonment, but in terms of emotional neglect. While her mother loved her, what seemed like a simple confrontation about a secret affair escalated into a violent tragedy. But the real question was, why did it escalate so quickly? Insisting that what she had done was justified. As interviews with her continued, it became clear that she had no real remorse for what she had done. Instead, she seemed to view the murder as an unfortunate but necessary consequence of the situation. His presence loomed large over the entire situation. The daughter's attachment to him was not just one of affection, but of deep emotional dependency. Investigators believe that he had played a significant role in shaping her emotional state, pushing her further into isolation and emotional turmoil. But whether he had directly influenced her to kill her mother was something the police continued to explore. Her inability to process the gravity of her actions and the emotional trauma she had caused left the investigators baffled. Was this a case of someone acting under extreme emotional distress? Or was it the result of a more calculated, cold decision to eliminate a perceived obstacle? In her mind, the murder was not an impulsive crime of passion, but rather a desperate act of self-preservation, suggesting that the daughter's sense of guilt might not have been fully formed at that stage. Many individuals who commit violent acts in moments of extreme stress don't initially realize the weight of their actions. In her mind, she might have felt justified in protecting her secret, and her attachment to the neighbor had clouded her judgment. She had become so deeply entangled in this toxic relationship and her emotional need for secrecy that she couldn't see the bigger picture. She believed that her mother had betrayed her by uncovering her secret life, and that the only way to protect herself was to eliminate the threat. The daughter's actions were driven by a twisted sense of loyalty to the neighbor, mixed with a deep-seated fear of being exposed. She believed that without the neighbor, she would have nothing, and that she would lose everything: her sense of control, her security, and the one person who had shown her any understanding. The investigation revealed that the mother's discovery wasn't the first confrontation. There had been earlier signs of the daughter's emotional instability and her refusal to open up to anyone, especially her mother. The confrontation wasn't just about a secret being exposed. It was the tipping point for a much deeper, more complicated issue. The daughter felt cornered, betrayed by her mother, isolated from her family, and controlled by the neighbor. It was this toxic cocktail of emotions that led to the tragic outcome. There was a clear lack of understanding and communication between them. The daughter felt misunderstood and alienated, and this distance grew over time. The more the mother tried to intervene in the daughter's life, the more the daughter pushed back, feeling like her privacy and autonomy were being threatened in many ways. The mother's attempt to protect her only pushed her further away, leading to a growing sense of resentment, only made his role even more critical to understanding. The tragedy, the involvement with the neighbor, while hidden at first, had been the catalyst for much of the daughter's emotional turmoil. The relationship wasn't just an affair, it was an emotional entanglement that blurred the lines between affection, manipulation, and control. The neighbor had become someone the daughter could confide in, someone who offered her attention and affection when she felt neglected by her own family. Yet, this relationship was built on lies, manipulation, and power dynamics that the daughter, at the time, didn't fully understand. The neighbor, despite his age and status, had a hold over her that she couldn't break free from, and the longer the affair continued, the more her emotional state deteriorated. His manipulation had created a perfect storm of emotional distress, secrecy, and isolation. All of it led to a moment where the daughter believed that murder was the only way out. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that this wasn't a simple case of an affair gone wrong. Was he the mastermind behind the murder, or was he merely a catalyst in a much larger, more complex tragedy? This would be the crucial question for the investigation moving forward. What at first appeared to be a tragic, isolated incident quickly turned out to be part of a much larger, more complicated web of long-standing issues within the family. The more investigators dug, the more they uncovered secrets, lies, and a shocking pattern of neglect and emotional abuse that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. As the investigation began to take shape, the deeper, more troubling aspects of the family dynamic came into focus. Psychological reports from experts shed light on the underlying trauma the daughter had been carrying for much of her life. It became clear that she had been suffering from deep emotional distress, which had been exacerbated by the strained relationship with her mother and the unhealthy bond she had developed with the neighbor. The combination of her upbringing and the toxic connection with the older man had created a volatile emotional environment, one that left the daughter vulnerable to manipulation and unable to process her own emotions in healthy ways. Her relationship with her mother had been far from perfect, but it wasn't just the relationship with her mother that created this toxic situation. When the mother discovered the truth about the relationship, everything came to a head. As investigators continued to examine the evidence, they found that the daughter remained in complete denial. She refused to accept responsibility for her actions. The daughter's refusal to take responsibility for her actions was one of the most difficult aspects of the investigation. Experts in criminal psychology weighed in, but even more troubling were the signs of emotional manipulation from the neighbor, although he wasn't physically present at the crime scene. As the investigation unfolded, the daughter's behavior became increasingly difficult to understand. She had convinced herself that she was the victim. She remained steadfast in her belief that her actions were not just understandable, but necessary. It was as if the act of murder had been a way to restore some kind of balance in her chaotic life, or was she just a victim of a much larger, more insidious manipulation? Had the years of emotional neglect and the toxic relationship with the neighbor driven her to this point? They painted a picture not of a young woman driven to madness by a moment of betrayal, shedding further light on the daughter's mental and emotional state. Their testimony added a layer of complexity to the case. In interviews with law enforcement, as well as in the courtroom, she seemed detached, almost numb to the gravity of her actions. There was no sign of regret, no acknowledgement of the irreversible damage she had caused. Her responses were calm, almost robotic at times, and her lack of emotional reaction to the death of her mother raised serious questions about her state of mind. Many were left wondering how someone could commit such a brutal act and yet show so little emotion or guilt. The daughter's seeming indifference only fueled the prosecution's case that this was not a crime of passion, but one of cold calculation, where the daughter had rationalized her actions as necessary to protect herself and her secret, revealing the deep psychological toll the secret relationship with the neighbor had taken on her. The crime was the culmination of years of pent-up emotions, manipulation, and broken trust both with her mother and with the neighbor. The daughter's inability to connect emotionally with the reality of her actions painted a picture of someone who had been pushed to the brink over a long period of time. The combination of her strained relationship with her mother, her deep emotional need for the approval of the neighbor, and the psychological abuse she had endured created a perfect storm of trauma. The trial revealed that the murder wasn't just about betrayal, it was about a desperate, misguided attempt to regain control of a life that had become increasingly chaotic and out of her grasp. Experts explained that the daughter's emotional state had deteriorated over time, exacerbated by the toxic relationship and the constant manipulation from the neighbor. Her emotional stability had been shattered long before the tragic day of the murder. The psychological abuse, combined with the overwhelming sense of guilt and shame over the affair, created a mental environment in which the daughter felt trapped. For her, the affair was not just a secret that had become a central part of her identity, a secret she felt compelled to protect at all costs, but of someone who had carefully planned her actions. His emotional control over her had left deep scars, and his influence over her thoughts and decisions was evident in the way she responded to her mother's confrontation. Experts testified that the daughter's emotional distress and her perception of the situation, as one in which she was left with no option but to act violently, were a direct result of this manipulation. The neighbor had created an environment in which the daughter felt that her entire world was crumbling and that murder was the only escape from the pressure and emotional turmoil she was facing. Perhaps in the days or even weeks leading up to the fateful encounter, the prosecution argued that the murder was not a rash act of passion, but a cold, calculated decision made in a moment of perceived desperation. They suggested that the daughter had weighed the consequences and chose to eliminate her mother as a means of preserving her own secret life and her unhealthy connection with the neighbor. The prosecution's argument was that this wasn't a spontaneous crime of emotion. It was a deliberate act born out of fear, desperation, and an overwhelming need to protect a dangerous and manipulative relationship. Or was she simply acting out of her own distorted sense of loyalty and fear? Whatever the answers, one thing was certain: this wasn't just a crime of passion. It was the result of years of hidden pain, emotional abuse, and a series of broken relationships that culminated in tragedy, even if that meant destroying the person who loved her the most. What emerged from the proceedings was a series of unsettling truths that painted a much darker picture of the events leading to the mother's tragic death. The courtroom was tense, filled with the weight of a crime that had shocked an entire community, and both sides had their own theories about what had truly happened. The defense, in a bid to mitigate the severity of the crime, argued that the daughter had acted in extreme emotional distress. According to the defense, the discovery of the affair and the subsequent confrontation with her mother had triggered an uncontrollable, explosive rage, causing the daughter to snap in the heat of the moment. They claimed she had been pushed to the edge, overwhelmed by years of emotional turmoil and the sudden shock of her secret being exposed. This mindset made it clear that this wasn't a crime born solely from an outburst of anger. It was the tragic culmination of years of emotional neglect, manipulation, and a daughter who had lost touch with reality, that her actions were a necessary response to the perceived betrayal by her mother. Investigation didn't just reveal the events that led to the mother's death. It uncovered the profound emotional breakdown of a young woman who had been broken long before that final confrontation. The secrets, lies, and denial that surrounded her life had festered into something dangerous. And when the truth was finally exposed, it had devastating consequences. She seemed to live in a world where her emotional needs took precedence over all else, where her actions could be justified by the pain she felt. And in her mind, the murder wasn't just an impulsive act, it was a decision made out of a warped sense of survival. What was especially chilling was the lack of self-awareness the daughter showed. In the end, though the case left many questions unanswered, was the daughter truly the mastermind behind the crime? When the case finally went to trial, however, the prosecution offered a starkly different version. Events. As the trial unfolded, experts in psychology were called to testify. It became clear that the trauma inflicted by the neighbor's manipulation had played a significant role in the daughter's actions. Yet, what shocked many throughout the trial was the daughter's apparent lack of remorse. As the trial progressed, it became increasingly evident that this was no simple case of a daughter betraying her mother. The defense attempted to show that the daughter's actions were not premeditated, but were instead the result of an emotional outburst triggered by the confrontation with her mother. They argued that, in the moment of the murder, not the result of a single moment of rage, but the result of a complex web of emotions, manipulation, and broken trust. Manipulation and emotional breakdown. At the heart of this devastating crime is a shocking truth: the bond between mother and daughter. The way it can twist relationships and cloud judgment. The lives shattered by this one moment of violence extend far beyond the family. The community, once shocked by the crime, now has to reconcile with the fact that the person responsible for the murder was once loved and trusted. Or are there lessons we can learn from this tragedy to prevent similar situations from unfolding? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and share your perspective. It is important that we discuss these hard truths and reflect on how we can protect the ones we care about from the dangers of emotional manipulation and secrecy. The daughter's future, forever marked by the consequences of her actions, is irreparably altered. The darkness of these situations often hides in plain sight, and it's crucial that we shed light on these issues before they destroy more lives. Take action, speak up, share your story, and help others heal. The neighbor, whose manipulative influence played a role in this tragedy, will also carry the weight of his involvement, whether or not he was directly responsible for the murder itself. The emotional scars left behind will take years to heal, if they ever truly do. The daughter, manipulated by the neighbor and fueled by her own emotional struggles, lost the ability to separate right from wrong, and the fragile boundaries that hold family relationships together. How far can someone be pushed before they snap? Is there ever a justification for taking the life of someone you love, no matter the circumstances? What does it say about the hidden emotions, secrets, and unresolved issues lurking beneath the surface? What might have been an act of desperation and fear became a tragic decision that cost her mother's life. The depth of the emotional breakdown that led to the crime is not just heartbreaking. It is a wake-up call about how far psychological manipulation and years of unresolved emotional trauma can drive someone, which should be built on trust and unconditional love, can, under the wrong circumstances, turn into something dark and dangerous. It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question the relationships we take for granted, and to recognize that, at times, the very people we trust most may harbor dangers we cannot see. The tragedy of a mother's death at the hands of her own daughter is not just the story of a violent act, it is the story of lost trust, broken families, and the hidden emotional struggles that, when left unchecked, can destroy lives. It leaves us all with a lingering question: how do we protect those we love from the secrets they are too afraid to share, before those secrets destroy everything? What started as a hidden secret between two people, an affair that seemed to only affect the daughter and the neighbor, quickly spiraled into a nightmare that no one could have predicted. She had been manipulated emotionally, isolated by her toxic relationship with the neighbor, and caught in a cycle of denial and justification. The murder, while shocking and tragic, was the outcome of years of pent-up emotion and confusion. A crime that no one could have predicted, especially not the mother, who never saw the devastation coming. The daughter had been so consumed by the shock and pain of the situation that she had been temporarily unable to think clearly. They would have to decide whether the crime was one of emotional breakdown or a calculated decision by a young woman who had been pushed too far, even when it means hurting the people they claim to love the most. The daughter's actions, driven by fear, emotional manipulation, and a misguided sense of loyalty, led to the most extreme consequence: murder. It's a stark reminder that even those closest to us can harbor secrets so dark, so destructive, that they are capable of unimaginable acts of violence. Either way, the trial had revealed the devastating impact of emotional manipulation and the tragic consequences of living in denial. The crime had been years in the making, and the repercussions of that one moment of violence would reverberate for a lifetime. However, the prosecution countered by pointing out that the daughter's actions seemed far too calculated. They highlighted the way she had positioned herself in relation to her mother, almost as if she had made the decision ahead of time to take matters into her own hands. Furthermore, they pointed to the evidence that suggested the daughter had tried to cover up her crime after the fact, indicating that she was aware of the severity of her actions and the consequences she would face. What became painfully clear during the trial was that the daughter had been living in a world of denial. She refused to accept that she had crossed a line, convinced that her actions were justified and that the murder had been necessary to protect her secret. This denial seemed to run deep, affecting not only her view of the crime, but also her sense of self. In her mind, she had done what was required to maintain control of her life regardless of the cost. The emotional manipulation from the neighbor and her own emotional breakdown had clouded her judgment to such an extent that she truly believed her actions were the only way out. The trial also shed light on the role of the neighbor. While he was not physically present during the crime, his influence over the daughter was undeniable. As the trial continued, there were moments when it became apparent that the daughter's attachment to him was more than just a brief affair. It was a deep psychological bond that had shaped her actions and decisions in ways that the court was still trying to fully comprehend. Some experts argued that the neighbor's manipulative behavior had essentially pushed the daughter into a corner, where she saw murder as the only way to protect the secret they shared. In the end, the trial revealed that the daughter's actions were as the trial concluded. The daughter's fate was left in the hands of the jury. The tragic case of a mother being murdered by her own daughter stands as one of the most chilling examples of betrayal. This crime forces us to confront a difficult question. How far can a person go to protect a secret? In reflecting on this crime, we are forced to consider the impact of emotional manipulation. The tragedy of this case lies not only in the loss of a mother, but also in the ripple effects that follow. In the end, this case serves as a harsh reminder that sometimes the darkest secrets lie behind the most familiar faces. This case forces us to confront difficult questions about loyalty, manipulation. If this story has left you feeling unsettled, we want to hear from you. Could something like this happen in your own life? If you've experienced emotional trauma or manipulation in your own relationships, remember you're not alone. Reach out for support.